Thank you for the warm introduction. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here for you today. The last time I was on stage in front of more than 100 people, I was in 8th grade, reprising the role of Bert from Mary Poppins. I don't have a song and dance number prepared for you, unfortunately, nor do I have a PowerPoint, so you either have to look up here, look over there, or look at your phones, and I'm sorry about that. I've got this so that I can keep to the script and not go off. I don't need any controversial quotes coming out today. So briefly, I'd like to go over the jurisdiction of my committee. It's headed by Congressman Rob Bishop, who is chairman of the committee. Staff director of the full committee is Cody Stewart, who I'm sure some of you know from your interactions up on the Hill in DC or with the governor's office in the past. Now, the committee has 5 subcommittees. We have a Water, Power, and Oceans subcommittee, Indian Insular Affairs and Native Alaskan subcommittee, Oversight and Investigations, Federal Lands, and then there's my subcommittee, the most important one, obviously, and it's the Energy and Mineral Resources subcommittee. So what I do in my role is I advise the chairman on all bills that are introduced by members of Congress dealing with onshore, offshore, coal, hard rock mining, and a variety of other issues. So we advise them, should these bills be moved? Do they need to be just completely forgotten about? Should they be something that we want to pass into legislation and make changes for our country for the better? Well, I didn't always envision a role in politics, and this is my first speech in a long time, so please bear with me. 8 years ago, in March of 2009, I was sitting in my parents' house, rushing to finalize last-minute law school applications. With a minor in Japanese and a major in political science, also known as majoring in going to law school, I had foretold myself a career in international business transactions with a specialty in Japan. Well, as I stand here today, speaking to you in English about energy production in America, let's just say my fortune-telling career is not taking off anytime soon. And I share this with you because during my attempt at prophesying, a very similar attempt was occurring in March of 2009 at a hearing before the Committee on Natural Resources. A chief economist with the International Energy Agency, Dr. Fatih Birol, was testifying. Now, his testimony was predicated on the IEA's 2008 World Energy Outlook, from which he concluded, and I quote, "On the supply side, the bulk of the increase we expect to see from in the future will be from key OPEC countries. The share of OPEC, which is about 40% today, will increase to over 50% by 2030. And the bad news for the non-OPEC countries is that oil production has peaked in most of them, and if it hasn't, it will peak soon." Indeed, the report he referenced indicated America had already hit peak oil production at 6.9 million barrels per day in 2007. Furthermore, for the United States, he indicated that in the absence of new policies, we could expect U.S. oil imports to be around 12 million barrels per day in 2030, which is very similar to the situation we saw in 2008. The only reason for any stagnancy, he said, was because of efficiency gains. Well, obviously he was about as good as foretelling the future as I was. For instance, rather than the 6.9 million barrels of oil per day, we're now predicted to reach an average of 9.9 million barrels per day by next year, surpassing the previous record of 9.6 million set in 1970. These numbers reflect a reality that could potentially allow the United States to become a net exporter of oil by 2026. This is a testament to the resiliency and efficiency of America's energy industry, of which you all are a part of. And again, resiliency is a key word here. Despite a lack of significant statutory changes over the past 8 years, and despite an overwhelming administrative and executive state that has sought to put you out of business at every corner, you have thrived. However, much of this success has occurred on private and state lands, not federal lands. In 2010, 36% of our nation's oil production was found on federal lands. By 2015, that had fallen to 21%. From slow walking the process of APDs to impossible regulatory hurdles in the leasing process, federal lands are an uncertain investment at best. And this is a problem. Here in the Uintah Basin, you have bountiful resources that are difficult to extract due to federal policies, limiting the potential for this area to become a model for an all-of-the-above approach, which balances environmental needs and economic needs. And although many in the environmental world are obsessed with emissions, this only tells one side of the story. You see, according to a June study by Strata, both natural gas and coal have the lowest acreage use per megawatt produced. Indeed, The Strata study found that for every 1 megawatt produced by coal or natural gas, the production of that energy used about 1/4 of the land that would be required by solar and 1/6 of the land that would be required by wind. Therefore, hydrocarbons provide the best return to our nation in terms of land use per megawatt produced. These resources will continue to play a substantial role in the future of energy production in America, and we in Congress must do everything in our power to create a reliable statutory framework that provides certainty to the extractive industries that truly provide the lifeblood of our economy, and a substantial financial return to state, tribal, and federal governments. The good news now is we have an administration that understands the multiple use mandate of our federal land management agencies and is seeking to advance smart energy development and allowing it to thrive on those lands. However, we cannot merely rely on regulatory and agency actions to save our lands. We don't need to wait 4 years and have that just swap back at the change of a new administration. And therefore, it is incumbent on Congress to provide regulatory certainty that extends beyond the next administration, and we'll need your help to do so. Having said that, I would like to briefly cover a few of the pertinent legislative goals that have been set out by Chairman Bishop within the purview of my subcommittee. In general, Chairman Bishop is promoting a return to the principles on which this nation was built, namely federalism and a divestment of power from the executive branch. With these principles in mind, our committee is in the preliminary phases of drafting several reform bills. First, and as I stand here in the Uintah Basin, I think it's pertinent to discuss our proposed reform bill addressing onshore energy production on federal land. And quickly, I'm going to go on a little anecdote here. As a Texan, a state that's very blessed not to have any federal lands, I think of the leasing process that many private landowners, including my own parents, have gone through. And a bit of a caveat here, this is going to be oversimplified to the nth degree. You know, when they're about to lease their land, they ask a simple question: would we like to lease this land for the production of natural resources? The answer was yes. That's their entire involvement they have had in the leasing and permitting function. Now compare that with the BLM. The BLM, on the other hand, develops a regional management plan, which in general represents the priorities not of you guys here, but of those bureaucrats in DC, and it takes years to develop because of the fraught National Environmental Policy Act process. Finally, once that is developed, entities then submit expressions of interest on those RMPs to lease the land which the BLM perhaps designated as available for lease. And again, this initiates yet another long National Environmental Policy Act process. Finally, after this happens, the BLM notices a lease sale, which people can then go and protest. And the vast majority of these protests are not from concerned local citizens, but instead they're from the National Environmental Lobby, including Keep It in the Ground, and they echo the exact same sentiments which the BLM has already heard from the Sierra Club and others, and the RMP process, the leasing process, etc. You know, at the conclusion of the protest finally you're able to bid on the land. What I just explained to you is inefficiency at its best. It should not take a company years to obtain a single lease. Nor should anti-development groups be allowed to enforce their own policy preferences through excessive litigation and other actions designed to specifically slow and derail responsible energy development. We think the BLM model should reflect the approach to private land ownership. And ideally, I would like to see a process in which the BLM determines the land available for lease through the RMP process, and after that, delegates the remaining permitting and regulatory functions to the state in which the federal lands are located. So how do we do this? Well, obviously, we have to statutorily reform the BLM structure. And what this means is that we'll be drafting a bill that has several key points. First, we need a reform of the leasing process. We need to ensure greater local and state input up front while discouraging obstructionist input designed to slow and derail the process. Second, a delegation of permitting and regulatory functions to the states. A state should be eligible to seek primacy for the permitting, regulatory compliance, and potentially some of the leasing aspects of the BLM. At the end of the day, the state knows best, as the people who would be in charge of permitting are the same ones whose backyards would be impacted by the permitting and regulatory decisions. Third, we need a greater financial return to the states that receive primacy. Some specifics that we're already thinking of are returning the administrative fees that were stripped from the states in 2014, as well as potential royalty reform. Now, other ideas that we have in connection with this legislation: should we limit this only to onshore oil and gas, but is there potential for renewables as well? And should we include a state conservation impact? I want to be very careful in what I say. I don't want to do LWCF 2.0. Rob would kill me if I said that, so I just want to make sure you guys understand that. Now, by no means is this bill finalized. These are our principles. And going forward, we hope to release a discussion draft that will further the conversation of reforms that must occur to ensure energy production on federal land is not subjected to the changing winds in Washington, D.C., or the inertia of the federal bureaucracy. Chairman Bishop wants all of you to be a part of this discussion. Too many times in Congress, we develop and draft legislation that represents an echo chamber of lobbyists, bureaucrats, and uninformed staffers. Now, my job is to take the input from those of you on the ground in state and local offices about the troubles you have faced in developing energy on federal lands so that the reforms will work in the real world and for the long term. Now, quick tangent here. Too many times in drafting legislation, we're subjected to the battles of old, industry versus environmentalist, development versus conservation. But what these narratives miss is the human element. In my short time here in Vernal, I've had the opportunity to visit several active leases operated by QEP and Berry Petroleum. Where I learned a substantial amount visiting these sites about the geology, measurements, operations, etc., what struck me most was the individual stories each person had. Out here, not many of you set out to be part of the oil industry from the start. Rather, you were highway patrolmen, hospital administrators, or specialized in agriculture. The energy industry has offered so many the opportunity to make a comfortable living and a plan for their family's future. And one thing that strikes me back in DC, when regulators decide to analyze the cost of a new regulation, they generate numbers saying, here's the potential cost to industry with X number of jobs to be lost. To many of us in DC, these numbers are just mere talking points. But what these numbers fail to convey is that behind each job lost is a name, and we need to make certain that that name is conveyed. It is important that going forward, we convey the human impact as much as the impact on industry or the environment. In addition to the onshore bill, Chairman Bishop has also directed us to explore and develop legislative reforms to both the Endangered Species Act and the National Environmental Policy Act. Both these acts were perhaps passed with good intentions, but they've become bureaucratic nightmares, creating endless uncertainty for industry, states, and the American citizens, while also creating way too many jobs for trial attorneys. And already on the ESA front, our committee has tackled several legislative proposals that seek to make ESA decisions more transparent, to discourage frivolous lawsuits, and to require an economic analysis be conducted that would demonstrate the cost of listing a single species. In partnership with the Senate and the Trump administration, we will advance legislation to overhaul the ESA, allowing for greater state and local input, encouraging greater coordination between the state, tribal, and federal governments to prevent listings in the first place, and yes, developing specific plans for the recovery of species that have been listed. As for NEPA, we will be conducting robust oversight hearings over the upcoming months and years as we develop specific legislative reforms that address the shortcomings of the NEPA process. Specifically, we would like to include redefining a standing requirement to ensure that only those impacted directly by federal programs will be allowed to have the right to sue. We would also like to create a one-stop shop for permitting, enabling enforceable timelines and deadlines to create a greater certainty for industries across our nation. Now, let me be clear. By no means does the word reform translate into environmental degradation. We want to create streamlined processes that uphold the strict environmental protections that we already have in place. The flip side of this coin is that environmental protectionism must not require duplicative layers of bureaucracy that only provide litigious groups numerous opportunities to prohibit and prevent projects. These are but a few of the legislative opportunities we'll be advancing this Congress. And on behalf of Chairman Bishop, I look forward to working with you in this process. Quickly, I just want to say, please feel free to reach out to me. My email address is andrew.vecera@mail.house.gov. And if you guys want to call my office anytime, it's 202-225-8182. I don't have PowerPoint slides, so it is what it is. Before I conclude, I would like to leave you with a quote from President Teddy Roosevelt. Conservation means development as much as it does protection. Again, thank you, and I look forward to working with all of you as we strive to bring federalism back to our national government.